家好，我是徐振。
Shu Jan seemed like an ideal person to engage as this commissioned artist, which is a part of this focus project.
影片是一个纪录片。
Xu Zhen makes for an interesting focal point because he's very much addressing this moment where China is no longer something that's emerging, it's something that's completely part of the conversation.
你现在看到的是我们在攀登世界最高山峰珠穆朗玛峰。
This last decade, I think he's refined the sensibility multiple times, always retaining a real sense of absurdity.
大家看，我们终于爬到了山顶。
He claimed to have scaled Mount Everest and brought back an icy chunk of the peak, to have essentially reduced it by 1.86 meters, which is his own height. So there's always these references to pursuits that are ultimately about national attainment being parodied. There's a real humor to pretty much everything he does. In the fair is this series of paintings called Under Heaven, which is, of course, a reference to Jeff Koons's famous Made in Heaven series. This series of paintings involves using the instruments that pastry chefs would use to put frosting on cakes. So it's a joke about abstract painting, but it's also a very awkward translation of this Chinese concept, tianxia, which means the known realm or universe. There's always an element of total discomfort in his work. There's a very famous book by Lu Xun called Scream, and it was about trying to awaken the nation from its slumber. Really drawing attention to this kind of curiosity and also absolute indifference that might be one characteristic of contemporary Chinese society. Xu Zhen's work in the last few years has also been about how it situates itself in relation to the viewer. A real turning point in his career came in 2008, where inside a Beijing gallery, he basically restaged this very famous photograph of a starving infant in the Sudan being stalked by a vulture. By entering, you're part of this spectacle. I mean, you are not exempt, you're implicated in it just by virtue of simply being there. About half of the artists present from the focus section were born with the beginning of the kind of reform and opening era and belong to what we might term the on-off generation. The title on-off coming from the graphical interface of a VPN, which is the software everyone uses to get over the internet firewall. They have to toggle back and forth between a kind of Chinese reality and an international reality. So Xu Zhen was instrumental in the launching of a website. It's now called Art Baba, a website that I would say almost single-handedly eliminated the sort of time between when shows would happen elsewhere in the world and when China would sort of know about them. He was a very important curator, for example, in the late 90s, early 2000s, organizing a series of hugely influential underground shows. His understanding of his own very complex role in this Chinese art world is what led him in 2009 to consolidate all of his efforts under this brand name of Made in Company, referring to Made in China, like a Chinese manufacturing company, and a way of using this kind of moniker, almost like a metaphorical structure for a studio operation, but also really a way of reorganizing the position of the artist. His work highlights these conditions that have become so fundamental to making art in China. One purpose of this presentation is to try and shed light on the diversity of artistic practice in China right now. I'm really trying to do two things. One is to draw attention to a new generation of artists who are no longer constrained by this burden of having to narrate a national situation. And I'm trying then to pepper that with positions coming from older generations, like the Stars group, which was really the first instance of contemporary artistic practice in the PRC, back in 1979. I think that this grouping of artists and indeed of galleries really does show that for all of the lingering questions about how the political system influences art in China, there is actually quite a wide range of positions and possibilities coming out of this place right now.